Amnesty International report on the genocide in Gaza. Following. Time and again, Israel had the chance to improve the humanitarian situation in Gaza, yet, for over a year, it has repeatedly refused to take steps blatantly within its power to do so, such as opening sufficient access points to Gaza or lifting tight restrictions on what could enter the Strip, or their obstruction and of aid deliveries within Gaza, while the situation has grown progressively worse. Through its repeated evacuation orders, Israel displaced nearly 1.9 million Palestinians, 90% of Gaza's population, into ever-shrinking unsafe pockets of land under inhumane conditions, some of them up to 10 times. These multiple waves of forced displacement left many jobless and deeply traumatized, especially since some 70% of Gaza's residents are refugees or descendants of refugees whose towns and villages were ethnically cleansed by Israel during the 1948 Nakba. Despite conditions quickly becoming unfit for human life, Israeli authorities refused to consider measures that would have protected displaced civilians and ensured their basic needs were met, showing that their actions were deliberate. They refused to allow those displaced to return to their homes in northern Gaza or relocate temporarily to other parts of the Occupied Palestinian Territory or Israel, continuing to deny many Palestinians their right to return under international law to areas they were displaced from in 1948. They did so knowing that there was nowhere safe for Palestinians in Gaza to flee to. Accountability for genocide. The international community's seismic, shameful failure for over a year to press Israel to end its atrocities in Gaza by first delaying calls for a ceasefire and then continuing arms transfers is and will remain a stain on our collective conscience, said Agnes Calamar. Governments must stop pretending they were powerless to end this genocide, which was enabled by decades of impunity and for Israel's violations of international law. States need to move beyond mere expressions of regret or dismay and take strong and sustained international action, however uncomfortable a finding for genocide may be for some of Israel's allies. The International Criminal Court's arrest warrants for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant for war crimes and crimes against humanity issued last month after offer real hope of long overdue justice for victims. States must demonstrate their respect for the court's decision and for universal international law principles by arresting and handing over those wanted by the ICC. We are calling on the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court to urgently consider adding genocide to the list of crimes it is investigating, and for all states to use every legal avenue to bring perpetrators to justice. No one should be allowed to commit genocide and remain unpunished. Amnesty International is also calling for all civilian hostages to be released unconditionally, and for Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups responsible for the crimes committed on October the 7th to be held to account. The organization is also calling for the UN Security Council to impose targeted sanctions against Israeli and Hamas officials most implicated in crimes under international law. Background. On October the 7th, 2023, Hamas and other armored groups indiscriminately fired rockets into southern Israel and carried out deliberate mass killings and hostage-taking there, killing 1,200 people, including over 800 civilians, and abducted 223 civilians and captured 27 soldiers. The crimes perpetrated by Hamas and other armored groups during this attack will be the focus of a forthcoming Amnesty International report. Since October 2023, Amnesty International has conducted in-depth investigations into the multiple violations and crimes under international law committed by Israeli forces, including direct attacks on civilians and civilian objects and deliberately indiscriminate attacks killing hundreds of civilians, as well as other unlawful attacks on and collective punishment of the civilian population. The organization has called on the Office of the ICC prosecutor to expedite its investigation into the situation in the state of Palestine and is campaigning for an immediate ceasefire.